is here. Oh, good. How do I get rid of that? I guess I got rid of it. So we'll call our meeting to order. We have a very busy evening with a special meeting, a public hearing, and an executive session. And I have a son and family that just arrived, so you may see some strange people wandering back and forth, especially a 3-year-old who's going to be hard to keep out of here. Roll call shows that all councilors are present except for Councilor Osher, who is doing the state's work in Augusta today. And first item on the agenda is public hearing to consider an emergency ordinance to repeal ordinance requiring persons to wear face coverings in the town of Orono and residential housing complexes to implement operations plan in order to reduce the risk of exposure to COVID-19 during a public health emergency and recovery. So, Sophie, that's our first item is the public hearing.
So just to give you a little bit of background, back in August, the town council received letters, emails, calls of concern from members of the public who were very concerned about our population swelling. And at that point, the state of Maine was only requiring face coverings in large retail establishments. And so council took the step of using its emergency powers to enact an ordinance that required face coverings to be worn in public spaces and the large residential housing complexes to actually do some pre-planning to help mitigate the spread of COVID-19. That ordinance went into effect in late August and has been in full force and effect. The state quickly moved after that to adopt executive orders that very closely mirrored or were actually more restrictive than the town's ordinance. In on May 24th, the governor actually rolled back the requirements for face coverings and social distancing. Town councilors and staff received requests from the business community to consider repealing the ordinance. So that ordinance is not tied to the state's executive orders regarding face coverings. It's tied to the governor's declaration of a civil emergency. And what our ordinance says right now is it gets repealed either when council takes affirmative action to amend or repeal it, or 30 days after the governor removes the state of emergency. So we are here today because at Councilor Greenyear's Community Development Committee meeting, this was discussed and councilors wanted to bring it forward for consideration of repealing the ordinance now and allowing businesses within the town of Orono to simply follow state rules. I think that's my presentation.
Thank you. Do we have any members of the public here? I cannot tell. If any member of the public wishes to comment on this, this would be the time to do it.
We have no hands raised at this time.
Thank you, Belle. Any questions from council? Councilor Gardner.
Yes, I mean, I do have some remarks I'd like to make in advance of the vote, since I wasn't part of that committee meeting, if that's okay with everyone.
Do you want to make them now as part of the public hearing, or do you want to make them when we take up the actual order?
Either, I mean, at your discretion, Chair.
Why don't we do it when we take up the order?
Sure.
Because this is really for the public to comment. We all set to move on? We will close the public hearing and I will move on to order 21-90, order approving emergency ordinance to repeal the ordinance requiring persons to wear face coverings in the town of Orono and residential housing complexes to implement operations plans in order to reduce the risk of exposure to COVID-19 during the public health emergency and recovery. Could I have a motion on that order?
Move approval?
In a second?
Second.
Thank you. And now comments from the council, and Councilor Gardner, you wished to speak.
Yes, so I listened to the committee discussion of this issue with great curiosity about how it would go. I didn't get to participate, so I hope you'll indulge me for a moment. So while I sympathize with and share the desire to get back to some feeling of normalcy, I intend to vote against repealing the ordinance at this time, and I want to offer two unique perspectives as someone who owns and operates a restaurant, and also as someone who spent the last 6 months working as a contact tracer. So we're being told by the CDC that people who haven't been vaccinated should still continue to mask and distance, but it's on the honor system now. In this country, we've spent over a year battling with people who don't want to wear masks and who reject the vaccine. And I ask myself, what about that behavior suggests that these same people are going to suddenly take it upon themselves to voluntarily follow the CDC's guidelines? I'm voting no, not because I don't believe that federal, state, and local governments should abandon the concept of enforcing COVID safety measures until either the percentage of fully vaccinated people is significantly higher or the vaccine is available to children under the age of 12. And I'll tell you the two main reasons why. First, as a business owner, not all frontline businesses actually want this change. Personally, keeping my staff and myself safe for over a year has been incredibly challenging. The majority of our customers have been great, but the constant exposure to people who weren't great has been a source of frustration and anxiety. We've been argued with, shouted at, sworn at, spit on, and put at risk, all for simply asking people to wear masks. But at least we had the support of the state and local government. At least with the most difficult customers, we could say, look, it's an emergency order. You're going to get the same treatment everywhere. Everyone has to follow it. Now we'll be left to fend for ourselves, made to choose between putting people at risk or losing business to other restaurants because we're enforcing masking for unvaccinated people. Second, in the committee meeting, a comment was made that folks with kids who are not yet eligible for the vaccine can just keep them at home to reduce risk, and that they could just have things delivered instead of taking them out to public places where they might be exposed to unmasked carriers. And if there's one thing I've learned in these thousands of calls I've made as a contact tracer, it's that there's just so much that people don't consider when it comes to what actually happens to you when you're exposed to or contract COVID. Like, for example, a single parent with a couple of young kids who works a low-wage job and doesn't have a support system, they literally can't leave their kids at home or afford to have everything delivered. They don't have a lot of choices. Say that the older kid contracts COVID and everyone has to quarantine, but they can't isolate away from each other because they're little kids, and you have to take care of little kids, and they might not have the space to do that anyway. So with ongoing household exposure, even if the adult is fully vaccinated, the whole family could be stuck at home for 20 to 30 days. And that adult has to be wondering, like, how am I going to pay my bills or get food or supplies? Am I going to lose my job? How do I access resources? I mean, some people don't even have the internet at home to look these things up. My point is that mask mandates are not only a public health issue, they're also an equity issue. And the approach to reopening at every level of government, in my opinion, does a disservice to the most vulnerable segments of society. The people most negatively impacted by this honor system approach are going to be those who have the least amount of privilege and who arguably have the most to lose. So to wrap it up, I understand the enormous amount of political pressure that the governor has unfortunately had to experience on an issue that never should have been political in the first place. I'm also profoundly disappointed that the governor has put individual owners of businesses and other public spaces in the position of having to choose between enforcing safety measures with no support or needlessly putting people at risk. I don't control what happens in the governor's office. All I can do is make the choice here that feels right to me, and that's to vote against repealing the mask ordinance at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Gardner. Other comments from council? I see none. Are we ready for a vote? on order 2190. Sophie, I understand you're the roll call person tonight, so would you call roll, please, on this order
would be-
2190?
I would be happy to. Councilor Perry,
In favor?
Councilor Gardner,
Not in favor?
Councilor Robertson,
In favor.
Councilor Grenier,
Not in favor.
Councilor Mitchell,
We lost her for a minute. It looks like she's reconnecting.
We'll come
Councilor
back.
Wingard,
In favor.
thought we would pause to get her vote.
Yes. There she is. It's your turn to vote, Councilor Mitchell.
Yeah, we want to remove the mask mandate. I don't know how
So
what the
you
wording
would-
was. Sorry,
you
my
would-
internet went
Yep.
out.
So that meant you would vote in favor of the order that removes the mandate.
Okay, thank you.
The final vote is 4-2 with the order passing.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify that this is the language in the ordinance that you received repeals the mandate immediately. So
Right.
upon the vote.
Thank you. So now we'll move on to our workshop, and we received a very comprehensive packet of material with a cover memo, some different scenarios on our budget, and then some description of the adjustments that have already been made to the budget, and then the items that councilors identified to revisit and discuss. And our goal tonight is to come to some conclusion on those items and to end up with a budget that we can take to a public hearing. So Sophie, would you like to comment on the introductory material?
I could absolutely do that. So in the budget memo that I provided, I tried to kind of recap how we got where we are. And also wanted and talked a little bit about the three items that are still kind of up in the air, which make it hard to understand the impact that the budget will have on the community. The first is with revenue sharing. There was legislation passed that would move revenue sharing to 5% effective January 1, 2021. That sits on the appropriations table, which means that it has not been funded. After that legislation was passed, the governor's change package was submitted. It's her supplemental budget, which funded revenue sharing at 4.5%. So we at this point don't know what, if any, amount of revenue sharing would be increased. Right now, what we know is going through would be flat funding at 3.75%. So we know that there's no suggestion that it would be dropped, which is why I gave you the three different budget summary forms. The second element is the state aid to education. So also as part of the governor's change package, there was finally the state filling its obligation to support local education at 55%. According to MMA, that would equate to about $310,000 for Orono. Orono RSU 26 has gone through their budget process. I mean, we're holding the referendum on their budget on Tuesday. And so according to Tom, who was at the budget meeting, what the school has said is it all depends on the way that legislation is passed and if there's an availability for them to try to pass some of that through as tax relief, they would. We don't know what it will look like. So I can't tell you what that means for the local taxpayer at this point. And the final piece is the townwide revaluation. And I went into quite a bit of detail about the reval for a couple of reasons. First, we are just now working through preliminary numbers. Those numbers are going to be subject to change. There will be a informal hearing process that we hope every taxpayer will avail themselves of so that we can get the numbers right the first time through. But right now, I have taken the preliminary numbers, done a little bit of factoring, and the budget summaries that you received included an increase of about $44 million in value, taxable value. One thing to keep in mind is that that taxable value, we get the benefit of all of it this year. As soon as it slides through and is reported as state to the state as our value, it will impact our revenue sharing, state aid to education, and our county tax. So we get the full benefit of the extra tax dollars now. However, in the future, there will be bigger expenses and loss of revenue. I also tried to caution you extensively that the reval means very different things for different families and for different taxpayers. In conventional wisdom, in a reval, you'd expect a third of the taxpayers to see an increase of value, a third to see a decrease of value, and a third to stay the same. We are not necessarily seeing that in this reval. It's 27 years in the making. It is an absolutely wonky market right now, and we are trying to do what we can to protect the town against being at 100% today and 120% tomorrow, because that comes with a loss of revenue as well. So trying to work through, at the end of the day, I think what's important to keep in mind is if the budget that you pass requires more tax dollars from the public, it means people have to pay more. Even if you take the mill rate out of it. You know, the mill rate is a calculation of the dollars that we need to collect divided by the total taxable value of the community. If we don't know what that taxable value is, we can still get a sense of whether or not people are going to have to pay more taxes in general by whether or not the budget we produce requires us to commit more dollars for tax for collection. So I tried to carefully, succinctly lay that out for you. I also gave you a budget revision list that detailed about $725,000 that had been removed from the budget. Unfortunately today, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we had to make some changes to the police payroll to reflect a hire that we were able to bring in, but we had to bring that person in at top of scale, so it changed some factors. We also caught a mistake in some of the steps that we had. So we've addressed that. That is an increase of $10,000. So your 725 is 715 now. I would suggest that we simply subtract the equal amount from the overlay for the purpose of showing this. That doesn't, if that's all right with council. Okay. So then I gave you the summaries of essentially the only thing that changed on those three summaries was revenue sharing, and it kind of showed you the impact of the three options that we had. I gave you an up-to-date municipal operating expense budget that shows on the municipal side a total expense increase for non-capital of $777,000. I also shared with you, we didn't ask, as part of our budget process, councilors indicated that there were some things that they wanted to go back and look at. At a workshop, folks agreed that everybody would work to get me the items that they were most interested in so that I could provide some background information so that staff didn't have to talk through this discussion, and it could be yours. I received information from 6 counselors, and that information is here. The one that I left off was around the market wage, but I've talked with that counselor and they have since indicated that they're comfortable with where we are in that process and did not need me to go back and add that at this point. So there is a kind of a chart that has what the item is, what the effective reduction would be, and from staff's perspective, what the potential impacts of that reduction would be. We also have one of the items that is on that list is an assessment of the public safety building. And Chief Lowe and Chief Ewing got together and wrote you an email to express kind of what their rationale for that budget item was. And one of the items on that list was the idea of making further reductions in capital infrastructure. And so Rob Yerkes, our Public Works Director, has gone through and given you an updated scenario for what would happen if we removed the Essex Street project from this year. So that is what is in background material. I don't know if it would make sense to answer questions or for folks just to jump in and for me to answer questions as we go along.
Well, let's stop for just a minute and see if there are any questions on the material that you've reviewed so far, which is not the items that were identified by counselors, but the other material that you presented. Are there any questions on that for Sophie? Yes, Laura. You're muted.
Switch from like just the $10,000 of the 725, and you said let's just take that out of the overlay. I didn't understand what that meant.
Let me see if I can explain it to you then. So when you look at your budget summary, let's just, so we're all looking at the same numbers, let's pull out the 4.5% revenue sharing so that we've got the same sheet in front of us. If you notice under municipal budget expenses, we have operating expenses, debt, economic development, and overlay. And under overlay, it says it's estimated. So overlay is not a budget line. Overlay is created as a function of commitment. And in Orono, we use overlay to pay refunded abatements out of. If, for example, we were really nervous about our position with fund balance, we might commit a higher overlay to allow money to sweep to fund balance at the end of the year. It is technically a function of rounding in the tax commitment, meaning with the tax commitment, you have all of your expenses minus all of your revenues creates a net tax commitment. You then divide that number by the value. And if you just left it at that number tags out multiple decimal points and is not a usable number. So you shrink that number to essentially dollars and cents, so 4 decimal places, and you use overlay to round your commitment so you can actually get to that 4th decimal place. We use it, like many towns, for more than that. As part of the budget, I historically put in usually between $75,000 and $100,000 as our overlay number as we discuss what the budget's going to look like. Council adopts a budget with a tax rate that we know we don't have all the pieces to actually calculate. And we use that overlay, play with that number to try to get as close as we can to where you are. I hope that if I've done my job correctly, I have left some value on the table. This is a conservative new value that we're using. So I would feel comfortable simply dropping the overlay, the $10,490, so that your net doesn't change with that. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. Any other questions before we move on?
I just have one, and it is the budget summary, right? And the projected tax rate, and I'm looking at the 4.5% revenue sharing one has, and because I couldn't tell with all the numbers, has the budget reduction that we are going to discuss tonight, has that been taken out or has that not been taken out?
No, and none of the items that we're going to discuss tonight have been taken out of the budget.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
The things on the revision list are the only things that have been taken out.
Okay,
That number.
nope, perfect. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yep. Anything else before we move on? So I think the most efficient way to do this is to just go item by item, see if there are any comments, and see if we can come to a conclusion that it stays or it goes. Laura?
Can I ask one more question? So the revision list included some items from, well, does it include some items that counselors asked for
No.
and were, or not?
It does not include any of the items that were submitted by council members to revisit.
But some of the revisions were made in light of a desire to kind of be conservative. Like in some, or not at all, like the capital infrastructure, for instance.
So the review, the scope, that was, we reviewed the scope and saw that when we pulled the Broadway out of our downtown, our Plummer, what was it? Plummer Middle School and James Street project, that we did not take all of the costs associated with Broadway out. We've already applied Broadway somewhere else, so it's a duplicate. So we pulled that out. On the revision list, those would be things that are more, we find something, there's a new application of grant funding that we could use. One of the big ones that didn't make any difference in the net, but made a huge difference in the growth in the expense line, was taking the fire truck out, because we're gonna fund that on a totally different method. We're gonna use a lease or a loan to fund that. It's what was in the budget. So that's why that's there. So the revision list up until this point, Laura, is just more technical things that I would talk through with Tom and make a change. But we note everything. If we've done our job right, when you get to the end of the budget and you take the final revision list and you compare it, the initial budget that was presented to what was adopted, the difference should be what you see on that revision list only. So it's our way of tracking.
There is actually one item on the revision list that we discussed as a council and came to, I think, a pretty clear consensus, and that was removal of the ice rink work, the $73,000. And so that has already been taken out.
Yep.
I just want to share the reason I asked that was because the total of that is close to the number that I was referring to in prior meetings of like 800,000 or in that realm, but like not related to what I would cut, but I'm just saying, like, if we were looking at removing about 800,000 from that original budget, this gets us close to that just through revisions. So that was why I was wanting to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on. The first item on our list of things to revisit were capital equipment, and that is the police handgun replacement and adding optics, and that was at a cost of $17,000. And we had a nice, concise explanation from Chief Ewing as to why that was something that he was advocating for. Are there any questions on this item? Chief is here if you have them, but I think his explanation was very clear.
I don't have any, I mean, I don't have any concerns about this item remaining in the budget. I think that it makes a lot of sense. I think that it's in line with the values that our community wants to see from our police department. And I think it's a smart move. And I think that, you know, the benefits of this new system are completely worth the expense at this time.
From my perspective, I think Chief Ewing presented a very clear rationale for it. I support keeping it in. Any other comments? Maybe rather than take a roll call on any of these, is there anybody who would like to see it removed? I see no comment. So I'm going to say that stays in. The next item is Public Works pickup truck purchase for $45,000. And again, you have a pretty clear rationale from Rob Yerxa. Questions, comments? Anyone want to advocate for removal of that item? Seeing none, I'm going to say that stays in. The next item I have is the police cruiser replacement, $52,500. And again, we have a rationale from Chief Ewing on the need for that replacement. Anybody want to advocate for removing that? Or ask questions? Yes, Councilor Wingard.
I don't want to advocate for removing this necessarily. I just have a question, and perhaps Chief Lowe can comment on this as well. In some of the documents we received, they describe how they're sharing a vehicle right now for the deputy fire chief. And I wonder if there is a continued opportunity for a shared vehicle, or whether both departments really need replacement vehicles. That's seriously a question. That's not advocating one or the other.
That's a good question. We are sharing the vehicle because of their dire need, with the deputy fire chief's vehicle being uninspectable and unusable right now. We have had to have our cadet that's in the academy take his own vehicle for the last few weeks because of being down another car. That would normally be, he would normally use that spare car, or a trainee, or if someone going to training would use that spare car. So just to be kind, we offered the car to the fire department so they would have it regular use. And we've kind of forced our cadet to use his own vehicle, and we're paying mileage.
We like a kind police department. Later in this list, we have the proposed purchase of a vehicle for the deputy fire chief, and it might be time to deal with that when we get to that list, get to that item on the list. So maybe we stick to the police cruiser at this point, and I don't see any sense of people wanting to remove that from the list. Okay. If I'm misreading, you got to let me know. So I'm saying that's in. And the very next item is Deputy Fire Chief vehicle replacement at $40,000. And I think Councilor Wingard did raise a good comment. Is there an opportunity with the replacement of a police cruiser for the Deputy Fire Chief to have a retired cruiser? We do have quite a explanation from our fire chief as to why that's not an appropriate use of vehicles, but Chief, you want to comment on that?
Sure. I think one of the things that's missed is that we really do a dissimilar role than our law enforcement companions do, where we're in the field, we are doing measurements, we're running incident command, we're doing a lot of different things. We're towing boats. If necessary, we will carry the hazmat trailer, those types of things. So while in theory, a purely administrative vehicle would work for what we're doing. And that's really kind of what we're doing now with the hand-me-down police cruisers. It's really not adequate for our mission in the fire service. And I think it's important to note, and I noted it in the memo, that any vehicles that I buy anyway are certainly dual purpose vehicles at least. I don't look for a luxury car or vehicle to be traveling around in for either me or Deputy Chief St. Louis. They have to be functional and they have to be purposeful for the community. So to have a police cruiser works to fill that admin role, if that's all that I did is went to meetings and went home in the evening or whatever. But to support the department and support the community, or Rob's Deputy Chief St. Louis' role to support the community, it doesn't make sense for us to continue that. The other thing is when we get those vehicles, they're rotated out of police service, and there's some question as to whether or not, one, we're transferring liability for maintenance for those vehicles, and then number two, they are still emergency vehicles and subject to the same types of conditions that are police vehicles are driven, albeit not as frequent. So
Thank you, Chief. Questions, comments?
And again, I think I asked Rob this last time we were here. What does happen to the retired police cruiser?
So I will certainly defer to Sophie on this because I'm not exactly sure, but as far as I know, vehicles that are no longer of use to us in public safety are typically typically will go out to bid, like we did for our ambulance a few years ago. Went to auction and we got X amount of dollars for whatever that person found that vehicle worth. I can tell you that the vehicles that we have currently are both hand-me-down police vehicles. One is out of service and needs significant work to the transmission, other parts of the drivetrain and the engine. And yeah, so that's the one that we're looking at replacing this year, is the one that is completely out of service. And that's why we're sharing an actual police cruiser. It's not a hand-me-down, it's an in-service police vehicle that they were kind enough to loan us with blue lights and everything else. So.
Rob says that it is slowing traffic down left, right, and center. So it's doing some good work. I would just add to that conversation to say, when we were on the buy two cruisers, buy one cruiser rotation, there was a lot more life left in those cruisers for the code officer to have one, which you see the codes officer has one that's on its last legs. That, quite honestly, we evaluated both of the cruisers that would come out of the cycle this time, and instead came up with the brainstorm to try to take advantage of the free electric car for the code officer, because we did not see it as a viable transition. And normally that would be one of the things we'd look at. I mean, Rob Yerxa asked about facilities, if we would have a cruiser. And right now, the two that are coming out are just so worn and on that useful life curve that we're going to spend a lot of money to maintain them, likely. I don't have.
Sophie, I'm sorry. Sophie, one more thing I might add to that is similar to, like we talked about the large vehicles with, and I used Rob Yerxa as a comparison. I'll use Chief Ewing as a comparison, where cruisers have to be rotated every few years. We're expecting a life expectancy out of this vehicle to be 10 years, considering the amount of mileage it travels and those types of things. So again, high expense up front, but when you break it out over the lifespan of the vehicle, it's really, in my mind anyway, it's cost effective.
Any further discussion on this item? Are we all right leaving it in the budget? Would anybody like to remove it? I see no one advocating for that. So we'll say this is still in. So moving on to another capital equipment item, a mini loader, WL30 replacement at a cost of $90,000. And Rob Yerxa has provided us with an explanation, both in writing and verbally as we met with him. Any comments on this item? Wow. Yes, Jeff?
Yeah, I just want to say that I had a number of conversations with folks around town, and because my initial response was to kind of like swallow deeply at the price of this thing, and the folks that I talked to, you know, whatever small sample that is, were really concerned about equity of plowing, that snow removal was going to occur at the same rate and same regularity for every neighborhood. And that discussion, along with discussions I've sat in with council and with Rob, have kind of brought me around on this. So I think I had registered some real concern with this at one point. And I just want to say that the reason that I support keeping this in the budget is because folks around town that I've spoken to have really said that they are willing to bear the cost of this for snow removal. That's my impression.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other comments from council? Okay, any move to remove this, or we're gonna keep it in? I'm sensing it's gonna stay.
I think Councilor Mitchell was trying to get your attention, Tom.
Oh, she usually raises her hand.
Well, I tried, but then my
Oh.
mute and unmute
All
had my
right,
hands
Councilor
busy.
Mitchell.
I mean, I was equally concerned about this. I think we're in a different position now than we were the last time we talked. And it's not just because of additional funds coming in, it's also because of other cuts that have been made from that revision list. So like, it's a combination of a lot of different things that I think put us in a different position. So I think it's nice to see that some other revisions were made. And I guess I don't know about the equity of plowing around the neighborhood, so I can't speak to that. I guess I would just say I've been sad. I think the level of plowing is pretty satisfactory, so I didn't see the need to upgrade. But considering the big picture now, I'm comfortable with these expenditures that we've discussed so far tonight.
Thank you, Laura. Any other comments on this item? I'm sensing it stays. If I'm misreading anybody, let me know. In. All right, we have capital facilities, Keith Anderson house renovation, 0 in for that. Not currently in the budget, estimated at $250,000 for siding and to install a dry sprinkler system. I think the last time we talked about this, we talked about the desire to do a better analysis of the buildings that we own, the Boy Scout building, the former municipal building, the Public Works building rather, and the Keith Anderson building. We may very well find a completely different option on some of these buildings. Sophie, anything you want to add to this item, or?
I would just add that I have already begun reaching out to staff people and Councilor Wingard, because he needs to learn that when he makes a suggestion, he gets tagged to help with it. I think what I'd like to do is take the next month or so to come together with Councilor Wingard and staff to try to come up with a proposal for how we might move this evaluation forward. I would suggest that if we're going to do that, I don't know that there's anything on the North Main Ave fire station that can't wait 1 year. I mean, it's in not great shape right now, but it's not like the chimney's going to fall down because we already took care of that. So what we might think about doing is taking the $5,000 out and instead allocating some other money at some point in time post budget on how we want to move forward with the evaluation instead, if that works.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry,
So the recommendation,
are we discussing Keith Anderson or the fire station or both?
I think they got lumped together just then. The There is no money in the budget for Keith Anderson. There is $5,000 in the budget for the fire station. I guess they got lumped together because they're two municipal buildings that we're searching for a use for. And town manager is now recommending we take the $5,000 out. Is that correct, Sophie? Any other comments on these combined items?
I mean, obviously, you know, Tom, you and I worked for
did
quite a long
indeed.
time on the Keith Anderson project. And you know, with my connection to and work with the Historical Society, like, I'm not ready to give up on this building. I know that some people had said, you know, we should get rid of it, or public-private partnership, and I don't know what that would look like. I know that it doesn't feel responsible to allocate $250,000 to this project today, but I'm not ready to just abandon this building when we still may identify a good, necessary community use for this building. And I want us to stay focused on that as a council. I want to be able to figure out a way to move forward in a way that this building can still serve this community, and that we can really look at how and identify how it best serves our community. And I want to bring up again a point I've made before. When we think about the Keith Anderson Center as, oh, it's a place where sometimes there are meetings and sometimes there are plays, and can't we do that somewhere else, and la la la. Totally valid comments, but also there aren't a lot of spaces in this community that people can rent out very cheaply for things like throwing a birthday party for their kids to invite. I mean, it is an equity issue, and that's why it's a good community space. That, you know, it kind of levels the playing field for everybody in town if they need to rent a space or be in a space. So I am not advocating putting in $250,000 in this budget for this building at this time, but that does not mean that I think that council should shift its focus away from this building or let it go at this time.
And I would just, if I may, just add that
Sure.
I think part of what is driving me, Councilor Gardner, is I sometimes listen, and I heard that concern. I also heard from Councilor Wingard, you know, as someone who is a regular user of that space. And my thought is the approach of looking at everything we own and prioritizing what is most important to get us to where we want to be as a community also helps articulate for grant funding, for other opportunities. Normally, I would say with the Keith Anderson, we had hoped that we'd be able to use TIF money. There isn't as much TIF money, which we'll talk about in a couple weeks. But also legislation isn't passing. So we've got to get more creative. And I think part of what is difficult is our attention is split in so many different ways. And if council could really focus on what are the main priorities and how can we make it work? And it might mean saying that that property at the lake that we've held on to is not as important as this, and maybe we can get some money by selling that. So I think that we just need to look and articulate the goal, the vision, and the end point, and then staff and I can work really hard after that process is done with the community to figure out how to help get us from point A to point B.
Thank you. Any further comments on this item? I sense there's no argument against removing the $5,000. So we'll consider that to be out. The next item is, again, capital facilities, energy efficiency audit, $20,000. And I think you had information on that, Sophie? Or not?
Do. Councilor Robertson and I actually talked about this. Do you want to speak to this, Cheryl, or would you prefer me to?
I'm still of the opinion that this $20,000 we can hold off on. I think that there's money coming, and we also talked in my committee about energy efficiency audits, using, just using paperwork, bills, past bills, as a way to start. And that will give us like some kind of a baseline to start thinking about municipal energy audit, municipal energy audit with the municipal buildings. I personally feel like, and because the legislature isn't done yet, but I know that there's a lot of things coming down the pike that are seriously looking at climate type funding. So and it's uncertain because it's not done yet, like everything else in the budget. But my own personal feeling is that this 20,000 we can hold off on, and that it will be coming if we need to, but that we can start an energy audit using past bills and looking to see where we're at least in that respect. I agree that there probably should be a walkthrough, to check the leaks and the cracks and all that fun stuff as well. But I think that we talked about it as I talked about it as a group within my environment committee, and I think at this time that we can hold off on that for now.
Thank you, Cheryl. Any other comments on this item?
I'm sorry, again, I'm confused. Are we talking about the former Public Works garage or the energy audit, or both?
We're talking about an energy audit on public buildings, right?
Okay, so are we
Yeah,
skipping?
the public buildings.
Are we skipping that item? Are my things out of order? I don't know what's going on.
Oh, I skipped an item.
Okay,
You're right.
I'm
I did skip
assuming
an
that
item.
I'm confused and wrong, but so should we
We'll
finish?
go back to that item. We finished this one.
I just want,
So
my big question on this item on the energy efficiency audit was, at the last meeting, when we discussed this, I expressed kind of just maybe some confusion and frustration about hearing two very salient opposing points. And I was hoping for more specific kind of information, but I don't know, is it possible, or is it not possible, or
So I tried to get definitive information, and what I was able to find was some guidance from the EPA. And it's older guidance, but it hasn't been rescinded that I see, that talks about municipal energy efficiency activity. And it talks a lot about the process that you use, and that there should be a goal setting period where the community actually makes a commitment, which we kind of have in process within the environment committee right now as an environmental policy. We're also, as a matter of policy, working with a regional group and the environment committee on climate action planning. And part of that planning talks about doing baseline analysis in the community. So I don't want to discard the idea of creating more energy efficient buildings. I think that sounds like a great idea. But if we have the entire community in which we could look at reducing our carbon footprint. And if that's really the issue at the end of the day, it would seem that it would make sense to develop a policy, develop a goal, evaluate our general carbon footprint, and then see what the low-hanging fruit is, where we can take the biggest bang for our buck. And it's just a different way of looking at things, and council doesn't have to look at it the way I'm looking at it. But I spent some time talking to Cheryl about that as the kind of chair of the environment committee, and also as a counselor who's working on that climate action planning with the city of Bangor with my staff. And I think that there might be more grant funding available for some of those bigger projects. And I think that the energy efficiency within our buildings would fit into that. And as our facilities staff is evaluating when there's something that's clearly, like, as an example, my windows were horrible and my blinds would go all over the place when it was windy. So I took a vacation and I came back and my windows had all been resealed and I don't have that problem anymore. So it's not like we're sitting letting big things just happen. If council would prefer to clearly address our buildings, I think that makes sense. I'm looking at it from the perspective of having incredibly finite dollars and looking more holistically and with all the other planning that we're doing and seeing where the energy efficiency of our building would fit in that hierarchy. And then perhaps there will be money to help us, especially if it's part of a bigger plan, I guess is kind of the thought.
Yep.
I don't know if I articulated that well, Cheryl, or not.
That was good. Other comments on this item? The recommendation is to remove this item from our budget to $20,000 energy efficiency audit. Is there any objection to that? I see none. So we'll consider that $20,000 out. And now I'm going to go back up to the one I missed and skipped over, and that was a capital facilities item, Public Works Garage. There is zero money in the budget for that now. Staff has quote for an evaluation of $18,000. Any comment on that? If there's no comment, it stays zero. Okay. Then let's move on. Public safety building needs assessment, $25,000. We have a fairly long memo from our police chief and fire chief justifying that expense. Laura.
I do have one question. The funds that we think are coming to be available around infrastructure for communities, et cetera, is there any inclination that we think that that is going to go toward, like, would support facility development within towns?
Wish it
Like,
would.
No.
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any questions or comments on this item, public safety building needs assessment?
Sorry, I was asking that question about the Public Works building.
Yep.
Sorry, so I was behind an item. There's Sophie's still saying no. Okay.
Any questions or comments on this public safety building needs assessment?
Tom.
My only comment would just be that I like, this is a building that it sounds like maybe some not so excellent methods might have been deployed when it was initially constructed, and that's unfortunate to have to kind of backtrack and make up for that now. But at the end of the day, this is a building where a lot of our municipal employees spend a lot of their time, and to be able to work and sometimes live there functionally, I think that the need is clear from this memo that this is something that needs to be evaluated.
My only thought with this was that 25,000 was too low, that it was going to take a little bit more money than that, given, costs these days. That was the only kind of question that I had on that one.
I want to be just really clear. This is an evaluation. That is not attempting to.
Oh,
fix
that's not
all of the
okay.
things.
Good. That makes more
The
sense.
cost will probably be significantly higher than
Okay, thank
25,000.
you.
The cost is probably going to be upsettingly high, but
Right.
we should find out.
Definitely.
Good. Any other questions on this item, Jeff?
Yeah. So we know that the building has significant deficiencies, and we know that we have a need. I guess I'd ask Sophie or the chiefs, what is the timeline for a build out? Like, if we had, is this assessment necessary to do at this time, given that maybe a building is a process that takes 5 years, or maybe it takes 3 years? So I think, one of the comments I made earlier was that, an assessment like this is going to tell us exactly what we know, is that the building is deficient. So what's the priority, I guess?
If, would you like me to answer that, Sophie? Or do you want to take it?
You can.
Okay, so I think, Counselor, what we're looking to determine is to figure out what we don't know with the building right now. And that should help you and the rest of the council determine what the capital priorities are going to be going forward. If there are structural issues, then you'll have to raise money through the capital budget to fix whatever needs to be done. I don't think it's so critical that it needs a station replacement, but if that were the case, then certainly that was something that you would have to plan for over the next couple of years. We're not in any risk of losing the building or anything like that, but there are certainly things that we don't know, or things that we think that should be assessed to make sure that the building is safe and functional and going to be able to carry you through the next, I'd like to think, another 40 years at the very least. But again, this is in our mind, this is an initial look at what we need, and then we can come back and talk to you further. There's some other emerging things that we need to consider when we look at, like, dignity of access. How are handicapped people able to enter the building, or are there other things that need to be considered? Perhaps religious concerns, like if we hire somebody who is Muslim, it needs to pray. Are there spaces to be able to do that? So it's not just functionality of the building, it's looking long-term into those other areas that we need to be concerned with as well. If that answers your question, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Laura.
Laura, go ahead. You're muted.
Sophie, you had something to say. I just have a question.
Oh, I'm going to tag on to that just a little bit, because there are 3 points I think I'd like to make. The first is part of what we're trying to do in this assessment is identify if there are things that we could do to fix that wouldn't cost a ton of money. Is it a matter of, especially when you come to some of the creature comfort pieces, like you can't walk in the chief's office sometimes during the year without a sweatshirt and a parka on. There are other times of the year that when I go upstairs to the dorm for the firefighters, it is uncomfortable, even in a t-shirt and jeans, and we're asking them to be up there. They can't leave, they are captive there. So are there things, we're wondering if there are some things that would be easier fixes that we just don't have the expertise to know, and our vendors don't have the expertise to know. The second thing is public safety buildings are different than any other municipal building, in that they are eligible for funding in places where the feds and the state don't allow other types of buildings for that level of funding. So you can use, if we had money in the TIF, we could use TIF money to upgrade our fire department, not to make repairs, but if we said we're growing, we need to blow out a wall, there's an opportunity that you could take debt and pay it back out of the TIF for public safety buildings. There are also federal grant programs, very cute, federal grant programs that would be more available to public safety than other areas. What we've learned over time is being shovel ready, having a clear idea, understanding of what the problem is and what the argument is absolutely critical to be able to capture those funds. And I think that's what we're looking for right now. The last point I'm going to make is neither of the chiefs will say this, because we have gotten them so attuned with this is a business and we do what the council wants, but not doing this assessment right now, given what we're asking staff to be in, I think sends a message to staff that is not what council would intend. And I think our staff should know that we prioritize their arrangement, especially since this staff spends more hours in this building than any other building in town. I think that that's critical, and I can't undersell it. I think it's really important for morale.
Thank you, So,
I have one quick,
sure.
oh,
Sure,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
So flipping this around, if this assessment gets done, this is obviously not something that, your regular home inspector or building inspector can do.
Right.
Do we have access to a firm or somebody with the expertise to do that? Okay, great. Thank you.
Anything else on this item? Laura?
Well, I did have a question about we want to be in the building for 40 years. So I'm not going to hold anyone to that statement, but I guess I am curious, like, do we have, like, population hasn't changed dramatically, but I know in some other places population hasn't changed dramatically, and their emergency services have still needed to grow. So is this a space assessment also? And are we considering that as far as how we plan around this building? And we're not planning for growth? Or are we? Or we're evaluating that as it comes?
I think
Go ahead, Sophie.
I'm gonna say part of our analysis, at least as I vision it, is a lot like what we did when we were thinking about the public works facility. We brought experts in to help understand our current operations, to understand what the predicted growth would be moving forward. I will take a little, I know it might not seem like we have grown. Orono actually a couple years ago was the fastest growing community in the state of Maine. And we have brought, when I came in, I think we've brought 500 or 600 people into town since I've been here in the last decade. So we are growing, especially compared to 1996 when that building was initially built. So I do think we need to look forward. The other thing that I think is really important is building for a new expected work environment where, for example, in Josh's world, we have enough room in the police department for reasonably one female officer. Starting on Monday, we will have 3. So I think we need to think about how we can configure our space in a way that can move with us better than the way it is chopped up right now.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess the information in the memo really does make you think about the structure and like what longevity of a building. So I'm glad to know that additional perspective is going to be considered around it.
So I'll actually just reiterate what everybody else has been kind of saying. I think we need to do this assessment. I don't want this item removed. I think we have to know what's going on first before we can even plan for it. And we may find there's like a lot of low-lying fruit out there that we can handle a bit easier. And Sophie, to your thing, I noticed that as looking at census, we were actually one of the only towns from the current census we just did that had actually shown some good growth. So we are growing.
Well, it looks like we've lost our chair. Seems to be having some technical difficulties. Hopefully he'll be back soon. But I seem to be hearing that there is support for keeping this item in the budget. Anyone interested in removing this item? No, all right. Next on the list is, hopefully Tom gets back soon. Next on the list is the Taylor Road paving, capital infrastructure. There's $0 budgeted for that. Sophie, or would anyone like to jump in?
I don't know. Councilor Mitchell, this was on your list, so I don't know if you want to speak to it. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, as I had mentioned in my email list I sent you, I didn't have the budget stuff right in front of me. So I just emailed you a list of things that stood out, and I wasn't realizing this wasn't in this year. So that was my email.
So we can move right along. It's nice to speed past items on a long list. Okay, so the next item would be another capital infrastructure item, reducing capital infrastructure investment by $50,000 to $100,000. So deferring the infrastructure investment. I don't know who wants to speak to that, but we have our road guru here.
So, Rob, can you just briefly explain kind of your rationale behind this, and also maybe at the very highest level, the rationale for the $800,000 infrastructure investment for folks who haven't heard my spiel?
Okay, so the $800,000 a year kind of comes from a very high level calculation that I did. I took the 89 lane miles of road that we maintain and thought, okay, if we had to pave every road in town next year, how much money would we need? And that came out to about 12 to 15 million. And then if you divide that out over about a 17 to 20 year cycle, you get your $800,000 investment. So that wasn't necessarily a number that we just kind of picked out of the air. It was sort of a very high level target to be able to maintain our entire infrastructure in a kind of a level playing field through over a 20-year period. So that's why I targeted the 800,000 to reduce it. Looking at this year's capital request, I think the one that I guess I would suggest if we did need to reduce would be Essex Street. Essex Street was an investment that the town made back in 2009, 2010. I don't know that many might recall the condition of Essex Street in 2007, but it was in pretty rough shape. And so the town spent a lot of money on reconstructing that road and bringing it up to standard. And now it's due for what we would call preservation paving. So to protect the investment that we made back then, to extend the life of the road so that we don't end up back in that same rebuild, wait until the end of that investment's life and have to rebuild again. It's been shown that preservation paving, doing maintenance paving on roads, this would be a basic structural overlay, extends the life of that, protecting the subgrades. We would do some, basic drainage improvements to make sure that we don't affect the underlayment of the road. But if you look at the road right now, it's at that point where you're starting to see some cracking, you're starting to see a little bit of deformation and things like that. And that is indicating that the pavement is getting brittler, getting more brittle, and will begin to start to degrade quicker. So roads don't degrade in a linear fashion. They degrade parabolically. So the farther you go out, the worse they're going to get quicker. So the first 10 years, you're in pretty good shape. The next 5, you're probably going to lose 50% of your condition level. And that last 25% is when it's just terrible and impassable. So right now is the time to invest in that preservation paving to protect that investment, but also extend the life of the road that's there.
Hey, Connie, take down the other one.
Tom, are you back with us?
Yes, I'm back. I lost you over there. Now I'm back. Sorry.
Oh, all right. So we've moved on to the capital infrastructure item about reducing the capital infrastructure investment by $50,000 to $100,000. And we were just coming to the point of councilors asking questions and making comments.
Tom, are you able to mute your other device?
Thank you very much. did. We're working on it.
In the meantime, Laura, did you want to ask a question?
Sure. Rob, is the preservation paving approach, does that result in like nicer drive, like for the driver experience, is it better too? Like I hear you talking about the cost savings or whatever, but like from a resident perspective, is there benefit to the approach from that regard as well? I mean, I would imagine so.
Yeah, absolutely. It keeps you in that 10-year window when things are good. So right now, if you drove Essex Street, I think you'd see the cracking, you'd see the signs of decline, but it's still it's a safe ride, it's a comfortable ride. And the preservation paving extends that sweet spot of good conditions out another 10 or 12 years. That's what I would expect the life expectancy of this investment would be, probably 10 or 12 years.
Can I just say, I am not in favor of taking this out of the budget. I'm not in favor of kicking the can down the road either. So I'd like to see this stay. I think when we look at our budget summary from the one that we got prior to the revised one with the 4.5 revenue sharing, we're still looking at a decreased mill rate with this in the budget. And I don't think that we should be kicking the can down the road. I think we should stick with the original plan and keep this in and keep our infrastructure up to date. Looking nice, there is a residential quality to this, but also, and I think Sophie and I were talking about this too, is that, when people come into our town, and a lot of people come into our town to drop off kids, or, the way that we present, I think is important. And I think that we should invest in it, and we should be very conscious and conscientious about our roads and our infrastructure. And like Rob says, it's going to cost more money down the road if we just wait. So, and I think the best example of that is the school that had to, that didn't invest and hadn't made any repairs, since 1984 or something, when they started really looking at how much money it was going to cost for kicking the can down the road. And I think that we need to stick with, I think we need to stick with the original budget and the original plan.
Laura, I see your hand, but can I just ask Terry or Jeff if they have any initial comments or questions first?
Okay, so Rob, on my previous councilor experience up north, we dealt with this same thing. It became an issue where roads, and up there they have a very unique issue with, back in the day, it was the roads were built for smaller potato trucks. Now they're like quadruple axle, many tons and everything. But we knew that each year it was just crumbling. And what we came to the conclusion is that we needed to invest up front to get everything caught up. We went on a 10-year cycle based on and we're a double town. We were a double township up there. So I'm kind of in that same kind of camp. Get everything where it needs to be and maintain it over a plan. The only thing I would ask is that as we move through and you're looking at the years going down the road, to put into account the costs increases that will happen for product and to actually do that work. So I know we're saying $800,000 a year, but we may want to kind of increase that slightly each year as we move up. So that's my thoughts.
Laura?
I really appreciated Cheryl's comment about how we present to visitors and the experience that people have in Orono. And I think that is really important. And it makes it a selling point for visitors and families to move here so we can continue to grow at whatever pace we're growing at. But I'm gonna remind you of that statement when we talk about rental regulation in the future. So I just can't help but throw that out there. So I agree and thank you, and I will remind you.
I agree with a lot of, what's been expressed. As long as I've been on council, there are certain items that have just been, nibbled away at. And most of it has been vehicles and roads. And so I feel like, especially with the infrastructure plan, this is something that we spend a good chunk of time every year that I've been on council chipping away at the infrastructure plan and saying, well, we can get by. And we happen to have a public works director that's very good at helping us get by. And while he has, again, offered a generous escape hatch, should we choose to shave money off the budget, I don't want to do that anymore. I think that we have gone too far in terms of kind of pushing the infrastructure plan. Infrastructure is not exciting like community services, but it's gotten a little out of hand in terms of how much we've chipped away at it and where we are now. So I think this is a great opportunity to invest in that and make sure that we can have serviceable roads in the future. So I'm not hearing any objections to removing this from the budget. So I assume we can move on to the library position. This would be a restoration of that staff position that was eliminated as part of the COVID-centric budget. And I don't know if anybody wants to jump in or.
Can I just interject that, like, with Tom not on the meeting, like, is it important that he's here? Does anyone message him or talk to him to see if we can find an alternate way to get him on?
I mean, hopefully he'll be able to get on here. I would say that, if we were in a split vote, I would say we should put off the discussion of something or other. Or if it were like a very contentious item, I would say we would wait, but if we have kind of consensus among the group of us that are here, I'm not sure. I mean, I personally don't have a problem with moving the process forward, but if anyone else does, I mean, we should. Anyone? It's tough to get service out there at the lake.
So, Sophie, are you in contact with Tom right now? No?
No, but I've asked Belle if she'll reach out to him,
Okay,
and she says she will,
okay,
of course.
all right. I would like to hear what Tom has to say about some of these bigger items as well. But we can discuss and fill him in. I mean, we can move forward. I mean, I'm okay with that.
Terry?
So with regards to the restoration of the position, I say absolutely do not remove this. The world, we said, and I was already on board thinking this was a done deal. So it's obviously very important for our community. The community uses it a lot. And we were informed that when you've gone to the digital side of things, it's even increased more for us. So I'm saying, me personally, do not remove this position.
Ditto.
I'm
I
not
think
hearing
Lori's got it easy tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we heard quite a lot about how difficult, the staffing situation has been, and now they're moving to, trying to make a reopening plan. And Terry's right, the increase of digital services. I mean, there's a lot going on, and there's a lot we don't know about how it's going to be to start integrating the public back into the library. And I think, I wouldn't want to remove this item either.
Thank you. And just to let you know, we have started integrating.
Yes.
We've now been open. I think this is our third week that we have limited hours. So,
Right.
but thank you for your support. That's great.
Many unknowns in the months ahead, unfortunately, but I'm sure that you'll do an excellent job navigating them. Any other comments or questions? All right, then I guess we can move on to the municipal pool, which I guess, so part of my document cut off the text that says close the pool or increase something.
Yeah.
So-
So everybody's did, because I was trying to use an Excel spreadsheet and missed but what it said was close the pool. And then we had a counselor that said, if you're not going to close the pool, find ways to increase revenue that the pool generates. And so there is nothing in this box by way of rationale. And the reason for that is because everything about the pool for this year continues to be a moving target. And so I wanted to take just a few minutes today to bring you guys up to speed as to where we are. The first thing I would say is my hat goes off to our facilities folks who, if you drive by the pool, that pool is ready to go. It is beautiful. The deck has been repainted. The furniture looks amazing. The water is sparkling. I wanted to jump in yesterday, probably not today. It's just an inviting space. And I will tell you, it highlights the gem that is for our community. So first and foremost, hats off to Rob and Dave Pinkham and the team. The second thing is not quite as evident, but Mitch, I won't say he's been pulling his hair out because he clearly he hasn't, but he has been working really hard. So I want to make it clear that part of the issue we have here has nothing to do with COVID. It is 100% around a national shortage of lifeguards, period. The state of Maine is running into it. We're hearing about it across the country. So when our pool director knew that we did not have the internal technical capacity to run a pool and be able to give swim lessons and do all of the things that need to happen with a pool, other than, as you could see from facilities, we certainly have got the facility down pretty pat. We reached out to the University of Maine, and part of the rationale for that is University of Maine has a year-round pool, and the idea was if they could advertise some outdoor pool time, it might make their indoor opportunity a little more enjoyable for folks. So we have been working through this with the university. The contract right now is sitting at the systems office, so I'm sure our lawyer will be going back and forth with them about, usually it's indemnification and hold harmless language, but we'll work through it. What we have is limited staffing. The staffing that they've brought on, a number of people have not ever been lifeguards before. So we are looking at, they are looking at offering a lifeguard course that we hope people will pass. We have no control over how many of our applicants actually pass the course, and we cannot have a lifeguard that hasn't been certified to be a lifeguard. Based on the information available to us right now in the pool of pool candidates, the Christy Deshane, who is our primary contact at Campus Recreation, and Mitch sat down and developed a general operating plan. And Mitch is going to stop me if I run astray. But in general, the plan would allow the pool to be open Monday through Friday, hopefully, with blocks of open swim, whatever that looks like, family swim, open swim. We kind of have different blocks of time with 50 people at a time for 2-hour blocks. So the idea being, if there were more than 50 that wanted to be there, you have to wait. We'd clear the pool every 2 hours. That takes 4 guards in the university setup. The deck, there would be a deck shower. The bathrooms would be open, but not for showers. Your shower would be on the deck. The pool, we are thinking, would be open from 12 to 7 with those 2-hour blocks of time. We would take the 10 to 12 block and make that a camp block. A couple of days a week or a few days a week, that might be our Orono Rad Camp that we run in conjunction with the university. But it also gives us an opportunity to invite other camps in, which would allow us to bring in some revenue during those 2-hour blocks. And when I look at Mitch's highly colorful census of when people come in to the pool, it is that 12 to 4 block that's probably the busiest, 12 to 5, 12 to block of time. So with that, we think if the pool of candidates pass their lifeguard certification, that we would likely be able to move forward with opening the pool. The pool wouldn't be able to open until the last full week of June. I think I heard the 23rd, and that's because of that lifeguard course that has to happen. There just are not enough people to keep
Sophie,
the pool. Yes,
we're thinking the more closer to the 28th because that class gets done on the 21st and you
Okay.
have to do training for staff.
okay.
So
It would operate between the end of the very last week of June through the second to last week of August. Is that the normal? Especially where we have so many 16, 17-year-old kiddos that have to go back to school. So I have already expressed to Mitch, one of the things I would be looking for would be a blending of the lifeguards. I don't think we want inexperienced lifeguards all by themselves at the pool. This model, given the age of the lifeguard, does include an individual who would be responsible for, lifeguards would be lifeguarding. This other person would be responsible for kind of more of what happens at the pool in general. Talking with Christy, the goal is if we have more availability, we would increase hours, we would add programming like swim lessons. But at this point in time, it feels much more responsible to open at this level and grow it if we can, as opposed to make a plan for this and then not be able to offer it and have it fall apart. So that is kind of the plan at this point. The other piece of this is, there was a big discussion last time about volunteers. And one of the things that got lost in that discussion is the fact that the option in front of council at any whatever time, if you want a hybrid and be open more without lifeguards, it needs to be very clear. This is a lifeguarded time. This is a non-lifeguarded time. And there's signage that has to go up, and it has to be abundantly clear that there's no lifeguard on duty. When we got into discussions about what volunteers could do for us, that our insurance company doesn't accept that. And when we talk about running municipal services, for this town to exist service-wise, we absolutely need the volunteers that we have. I mean, we just ran absentee balloting today, and you couldn't do it without the volunteers that showed up to help make that happen. But as a general rule, we would not put volunteers in a position where if they didn't show up, we've got a critical deficit that can't be covered. And the idea that because somebody's a master swimmer, they could volunteer at the pool flies in the face of everything that our insurance company is telling us we can do. I let the cat out of the bag. I'm not a big fan of opening a municipal pool without a lifeguard. And I think the other piece, Mitch followed back up with Wyndham because he was on a meeting where they were talking about opening pools. without lifeguards, and somebody from Wyndham piped in and said, that's what we're doing. So he followed back up with them, and what he learned is that Wyndham's isn't a pool, it's a beachfront. And so they are simply placarding their beachfront that there's no lifeguard on duty. And I think that is something people are used to seeing. I don't think people are used to seeing a municipal pool open without the safeguards that you would expect in a pool in that environment. And that I would pass over to Mitch in case I left anything out and stop talking.
You covered it, Sophie.
Mitch, I have a question for you. Given the inexperience of the lifeguards that we get, hopefully they will pass their exam. There's a rule at the pool that there's no flotation devices. I don't understand that rule, but would that be something that could be implemented, that we could have, the little ones could have flotation devices?
So ultimately, the reason the rule was in place was because of during the general swim time, the sheer numbers that were in the pool made it very difficult for those that were in a life jacket that were supposed to be managed by a parent or an adult right next to them to be managed by they weren't doing it. And so we felt it was really hard to keep an extra eye on those folks during that time. And that's why they were allowed during the family swim. We've talked about it, and based on that 50 number, we in talking with Christy, we feel like having the Coast Guard certified life jacket during any of those times would be fine, as long as they follow the rule that the adult must be within an arm's length of that person. So, that because we've restricted that number, that makes that a little easier to pay attention to.
Okay, that may make it a little safer too. People will be not as nervous. Thank you.
So I am back, thanks to Bell, and my apologies, and thank you for Megan for stepping in. I appreciate that, and hopefully I'll be able to make it through the rest of the meeting. I'm not sure what's happening here, but anyway, technology. Other comments on this item? We are on the pool.
I support the pool opening and keeping that in our budget.
I do as well.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with keeping this amount of money, remaining in the budget. Again, I mean, I would want to stress that, kind of in line with what Sophie was saying. I absolutely never would want to see a scenario where we had a pool that was not staffed by lifeguards and that was staffed by volunteers. I would not want to open if we were in that situation. And in terms of I think the approach of the 2-hour blocks is very reasonable, and especially that it's a very equitable suggestion to kind of, how can we broaden it? So in the morning, it's being used by lots of kids who are in camp, and in the 2-hour blocks for the rest of the day, we're letting as many community members as we can safely have with that staffing level in. I would not want to see a scenario where we were trying to do more than we potentially can, or where we were trying to make exclusive blocks of time for just a couple of people or a small amount of people. But I think that this approach is very reasonable.
I would just add to that. One of the things about that number 50, it sounds low. When you take the camps out, when you look at our numbers, when we look at the past, we do a daily total. That's kind of how we kept things up. And when those numbers are really high, those are on camp days, because you're bringing 40, 50 kids. I mean, before, sometimes up to 70 kids, but in adding that to the regular thing. So I honestly will be surprised if we're looking at numbers over that 50 number without camps being added to that mix. But I could be wrong. But if it's really hot, they'll show up. I know that.
Mitch, the fees, will the fees stay the same as well? The family passes and the fees?
That's our plan, is to keep those the same. They're really affordable. I mean, when you look at the cost of that, they're really pretty affordable. So that's the plan.
So I'm gonna amend Mitch just a little bit. If we only have 50 spaces, I want to make it attractive for our residents who are paying the bill. So my plan would actually be in the fee schedule, Mitch and I haven't had the annual discussion of his fees yet. In the fee schedule to leave the resident fees the same, but to increase the non-resident fee. The other thing that I will be asking council to consider at the Finance and Operations Committee meeting is with the late start of the pool opening, we will likely have some pool money, not a lot, left over this year. I will ask council if they will carry it forward to next year as opposed to letting it lapse so that we can fund any issues that we might run into with the pool.
Any other comments on this item? So I think we're saying that this,
I do. Sophie, I've actually was informed by somebody, if for the community who's concerned about wanting swim lessons, that the YMCA offers great programs that are affordable for citizens to go get lessons if that were the case. Secondly, so I do have one piece of concern with this, is that we just, as the committee or the council voted to remove the masked ordinance, are we putting those lifeguards on a 90-degree day in a position that we were worried about at a restaurant if there's too many people in that same predicament? I was just curious. Okay, no thoughts?
I can't answer that question. I'm going to send that back to council because that seems like a policy question, Terry.
Well, I don't want it to be a policy question. I'm just saying that one of the concerns when we were talking about the mask removal was because now it's like the science says, so everybody should be just able to go walk anywhere, walk into restaurants, walk into stores, everything. And you're going to try to cap the pool for a reason that doesn't apply to the rest of the town. Am I overthinking this?
So the cap on the pool is not about COVID. It has nothing to do with COVID. The cap on the pool is absolutely about staffing and the fact that in the past with lifeguards, we have had a cadre of returning lifeguards, people who have a lot of experience, and we've been able to blend in younger folks. So those large numbers of people in the pool can be managed by people who have a lot of confidence in their lifeguarding skills. When we talk with the university, they are not comfortable putting an unlimited number of people in that pool with less experienced lifeguards. So this is not a COVID issue. This is a staffing issue for us, Terry. And if we follow the rules with regard to the state, we could have unlimited access to the pool until Rob St. Louis came in and said we met the mythical max capacity. The university, when we work with the university, we just have to be aware that the system is requiring them to follow CDC guidelines. So they are ready, if we're going to use them for managing the pool, which I hope we will, they're going to have a level of safety beyond what the minimum state law is. However, the 50 people is not a COVID issue. It's a staffing issue.
Well, I apologize for that. I guess my mind was wrapped up in when we were talking about cleaning and when we had the conversation about everything had to be cleaned down all the time. I was still in COVID mode like I've been for the last year. But I apologize for that.
anything else on this item? Are we ready to move on? And we're keeping the 36,001, no, whatever it is, $39,850 in. Sophie, it looks like my page 5 got cut off. Is there any other item on page 5? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to page 6. And Public Works, Maintenance and WPCF, restoring the WPCF shared position. I'm a little confused on the number there, the 22,633. Sophie, that represents half.
Yep, that represents the impact on the general fund.
Oh, that's
which
right.
is the way
Gotcha.
we normally quantify that. But yes, that is 50% of the cost.
Yep. Great, because the WPCF position is paid through user fees. Great, thank you for that clarification. Comments on this item?
No problem restoring that position at all.
I think Mr. Yerkes made a pretty good rationale here. Any other questions? Then we will consider that in. And moving on, we have Public Works solid waste recycle bins at the landfill. There is no money in the budget currently for this item. If we choose to put that back in, it would be $13,000.
I think we've come up with another plan and that's fine.
Okay. So if that's the case, can we move on from that? And the last item that I have on this page is winter maintenance, create a winter maintenance reserve. There is no money in the budget for that now. If we were to do it, it would add $10,000 to the budget. I personally think it was a good idea. I just don't think this is the year to do it. Any other comments?
So Tom, am I,
Yep.
so you want to add $10,000 to the budget or?
No, I do not want to add $10,000 to the budget.
So-
Was I not clear, or was the information not clear?
Maybe the information is not clear. So the budget as it currently stands is premised upon taking a reduction that you already see in the budget in the winter maintenance line with the idea of creating a winter maintenance fund, because what Rob has done is taken the contingency out of that line. And so what he is saying is, if you wanted to create a place to go, he's very comfortable holding that that line lower, but that if we don't have a place to go for those funds, you know, for a heavy winter, that he would want to add $10,000 back into the budget, because he cut that budget line on the assumption that we'd have a reserve. That's what I'm trying to convey there.
And
And
the reserve would come from funds in this year's budget that were not spent.
Yes.
Okay.
Or a reallocation of the remaining public works facility debt, not OEDC debt line that we've taken all but $90,000 and reallocated. It's just sitting there that you would either allow to lapse to fund balance, or you could allocate $10,000 into this winter maintenance if you didn't want to add, if you wanted to let what's left in this year's budget lapse.
So since I don't want to add $10,000 back into the budget, I guess I will reverse my position and say that we probably ought to go with the reserve. See a couple of nods. And Jeff?
Oh, I was just hoping that Sophie could explain the difference between a contingency and a reserve for me.
So contingency would be in two ways. We have a formal contingency, which the council adopts as part of the budget, which for town council, it's usually $10,000 a year. It has been for the last 10 years I've been here. When staff is creating their budget estimate, and it doesn't happen in every line, but our winter salt would most definitely be a line that it happens in. Rob is looking at not only kind of the average, but he's thinking, you know, this is where we're kind of trending. Salt is super expensive. It is the lion's share of that budget. If I don't have money in that budget for salt, I'm gonna overspend it. So let's think about kind of not the worst case scenario, but definitely not the best case scenario. And he's gonna add a little bit into that budget line because there are such wild swings in how much salt we use every year. And his thought is if there is a pool of funds, and it's not just his, I totally agree with him. If there is a pool of funds that can kind of be that contingency, so we're not going and asking for it as part of the budget, it just sits in reserve. And if we need it, it's there, I think makes a lot of sense. You're not appropriating it every year. It just sits there and you can go with a smaller salt line on an annual basis is kind of the thought. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you very much.
So now I
I
have a
would-
question.
I would just, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, Rob, so it says create a winter maintenance reserve. So there isn't a winter reserve. This is going to create a winter reserve. Okay. So go ahead, Rob. Sorry.
Just the only thing I would add to Sophie's comments are that this is the only place that I build contingency into the budget of any line, winter maintenance, because of its unpredictability and the fact that these are not discretionary expenditures. I can't just decide to not plow the last storm because we're out of money. So I have to build some, it would be irresponsible for me to not build in contingency for extreme winter events, just for that reason, that we don't get to decide whether we plow or treat the roads. We have to do that, even if our budget is beginning to push the limits of if our expenditures are beginning to push the limit of the budget. So having this reserve to fall back on would definitely be a good thing for to keep our budget under control, I guess.
Laura?
Yeah, I'm still trying to understand, like, so do other departments have, I mean, there's contingencies that other departments would come upon too in predicting their budget. So do they have reserves? And from Sophie, what you described earlier, the overlay sounds like a spot where you have some contingency built in. And so we're not talking about a huge amount of money sitting there, but it is an amount of money sitting there over the long term. And I guess I'm still not, as you've described, I guess I was confused. Like I was understanding Tom the first time he brought this up, not like when it was recorrected, like you leave it in, or wait, whatever it is, but like you're adding to the budget by not doing this, if that makes sense. So I find this confusing now that it's been presented.
So I hate to confuse council. That is not my intent ever. I would say that to your question about contingency, I would say many of our departments have other areas in their budget that are more discretionary. When I look at, for example, court time in the police department, Josh doesn't have any control over that. And what happens is he does his best to estimate. That is fairly stable. You tend to see trends in court time that you can track a little bit better than the weather, because what Rob sees are incredible swings in costs. And it's not about how many inches of snow are on the ground, because some of our most material used is used on those not huge storms. But in other departments, we can also say, for example, if I don't want to send a bunch of people to traffic court, I can slow down our traffic enforcement. If Josh gets somebody who, if we've got a lot of overtime in this area over here, we can back off overtime over here. I also would argue that you're with the salt. I mean, that one line item is $110,000. I mean, that's a huge piece of a huge cost center for us. For Rob to overspend that has a huge impact in his budget, I guess is our point. We see Rob and I come up with lots of wonderful ideas, just the two of us. This is not something that is odd. There are several communities that have winter maintenance reserves, and it is especially has become more popular as the climate has impacted wild swings in the budget. And when I look at if I was saying go raise $10,000 so that we can put it aside and have it, I would totally understand why council wasn't wild about it. What we're talking about is taking assigned fund balance and assigning it differently, and the money still sits there unless there's a need. If there's a need, you're not digging into your limited money, because even when you see overlay, you're talking about 10,000 plus, so let's call it $70,000 total in contingency in this budget on a $20 million budget. There have been times that from my perspective, I think as a best practice, it would make sense to assign those funds. If council doesn't want to do it, and you also don't want to add $10,000 into the budget, you just need to be prepared that Rob is not going to make decisions about salt based on whether or not we have money in the budget. He's going to be making those decisions based upon the safety of the traveling public and what the conditions are calling for. So you might see significant over expenses in that line and no place that's been identified to take them from.
Cheryl?
Rob, how much does it cost? You may not even know this, but I'm guessing you do. We have a storm and you have to salt the roads. How much salt is that? And how much do you think that is approximately?
Approximately.
Approximately.
We average about,
can you do it? Yeah.
we average about 40 ton of salt per event.
Okay.
Salt costs about $60 a ton. So somewhere between 2,400 and 3,000. And that fluctuates. Obviously, this is all dependent on what the conditions are. Far more related to the duration of a storm than its severity in terms of inches. So, but we average about 40 ton a storm.
Okay, so about $3,000 a storm, high end. 3,000. Yeah. Okay. Would $5,000 as a contingent, not a contingency, as a winter maintenance reserve be enough?
Better than none.
Not really, to be honest with you. I mean, I think we chose this year because of the way our budget has panned out this year. We only had 25 events and 50 inches of snow. We spent $70,000 on salt, which left a little excess of $50,000 left in that account. So if there was a year to redirect some of those funds, this would be the year, and we're still returning $30,000 to the general fund. So it just seems like a good opportunity.
Okay.
I agree that it does. And to echo Tom's initial comment, this is a great idea. And now that everyone is on the same page, then I think we should move forward with it and not add $10,000 to the budget and not return all of the additional money to the general fund.
Great. I think we've had a lot of discussion on this item. Is there anything new to be added? I think the general consensus is that we should establish the reserve fund, that this is the year to do it, in fact, based on last year's experience, and move forward. We all set with that? Great, I see nods. So we've resolved that. That's it.
Tom,
it?
before we lose all of our department heads, I just wanted to say thank you to them.
Yes.
This was a very unusual year for the budget. I know that there are so many unknowns out there, and I'm not sure that we were always giving the strongest, clearest direction for staff, because there are a lot of unknowns for us to tackle as well. And I really appreciate that we have such valuable staff members whose professional opinions we can trust as we try to navigate a very unusual time in the world. So thank you so much to all our department heads for your hard work.
Ditto. And I also appreciate the excellent job that department heads did in writing rationale for the items that we've discussed. That helped a lot. Coming prepared and having read that in advance. Okay, anything else for tonight other than moving on to an executive session? All right.
Yes, I have 3 things, if I can, by way of a manager's report
All
that's not on the agenda. The first is, I know, the first is,
Nancy told me there was nothing else.
she didn't know. The first is that Council Chair Perry and I both received notification from the RSU that Director Aaron Ellis has had to resign effective immediately. I'm just really glad we have Jeff on council now. We snapped him up before he could go back to the RSU. But they are asking, given their calendar, they'd very much like to try to have somebody appointed by the beginning of August. And I think as long as council is okay with our process and okay with me starting our process, we could absolutely make that timeline. By state law, you are responsible for appointing an individual to fill the vacancy until the next annual municipal election, which is March of 2022. So this is not something you can get out of, got to do it. We normally, because of the importance of this particular position, we normally would put an advertisement out to the world so everybody knows there's a vacancy, give folks an opportunity to submit a pretty simple, just a letter of interest, and schedule this. I was thinking if we scheduled it for the June 17th Community Development Committee meeting, if that's all right with Councilor Grenier, we could make, you could decide where to go from there, and we should be able to make an appointment by the July meeting, if that works for you.
Sounds good.
Oh,
Wait, we're going to ask people to apply between now and the 17th?
yes.
Mhm.
Okay.
Is that
Okay.
enough time, or do you want me to move it further ahead?
If we get the advertisement out quickly, it's almost 2 weeks.
Yep.
Seems though it's
And
a
I
reasonable
would-
amount of time. That
I-
board
and
is a good place to put it, the
Yep.
message board.
Absolutely. And Belle is listening to us, so I bet she can make that happen. So that's the first one. The second one is just to let you know that we had been putting a lot of hope on the state legislature to allow remote meetings to continue. Right now, remote meetings can continue as long as the governor has the executive order and the civil emergency in place. The legislation that came out of committee allows for remote meetings with the adoption of an ordinance only when it is not practical or there is emergency that would not allow people to come together. So I am really unhappy with that decision. But at this point, we're kind of in this limbo, because at this point, the civil emergency is scheduled to expire on June 11th. And my concern is whether or not we'll be able to have, we had thought we were going to do the June 14th meeting remotely. It looks like that's probably going to end up being an in-person hybrid event unless we get some guidance from the state that says this, we can continue status quo. So we need to work with MMA to kind of look into that. Bell has been feverishly looking at ways to help hybrids so that people who want to come could come to town council chambers and talk with us, but we could put on a better quality meeting. It would still look kind of like a Zoom meeting for people who wanted to log on in the Zoom world. So we're still kind of working through that. At this point in time, we'll advertise that the meeting's going to happen and all the public hearings. My hope is that by the beginning of next week, I'll be able to tell you whether it will be in person or on Zoom. And finally, we're getting some complaints about the noise of the crosswalk signal on Main Street. Just to let you know, those crosswalk signals are pretty fragile. And when we have people that beat on them, don't treat them with kid gloves, they break. And when they break, we have to wait for the city of Bangor to have the ability to get out to Orono to fix them for us. So we are aware that there's a problem. Rob has put the work order in and we are just patiently waiting until they can get fixed. But what would be really helpful is when we spend the money to fix them, if people could just gently press them when they want to use them and not bang on them. Just saying.
Is that it?
So that is it. Everybody received an email right before this meeting started that has a link to an executive session. My thought, Council Chair Perry, if you're okay with it, is that we would announce that there will be no formal action out of this executive session. And so we could close this meeting, go into executive session, and then terminate the meeting as soon as the executive session is over.
Sounds fine. I hope I'm going to have better luck getting back on than I did earlier.
Give me a call if you need help.
Yep. So we need a motion to go into an executive session. And the reason for we're going into executive session pursuant to MSRA section 405(6)D to discuss collective bargaining negotiations with Maine Association of Police Orono Unit. Could I have a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
And
Second.
seconded, I see. Yep. Thank you very much. So we will close this meeting. We will
Under state law, I need a super majority vote,
Yep.
which means that we got to do the roll call, and I apologize for that.
Yep. Fine.
The roll call, Tom Perry,
In favor.
Councilor Gardner,
In favor.
Councilor Robertson,
In favor?
Councilor Grenier,
In favor.
Councilor Mitchell,
Yes.
Councilor Wingard.
In favor.
Excellent. And it is 7:07.
And we're going to reconvene as soon as we leave and hopefully come back.
Yes, give me just a minute because I've got to start this meeting. So if you wanted to just stretch your legs and come right back, that would be awesome. You should
Great.
be in good shape.
See you shortly, hopefully.